Greetings everyone, how are you doing? I'd like to bring you a game today between Vassily Ivanchuck and Lanier Dominguez Perez. If you don't know about these two players, well, here's a little something about them. Mr. Ivanchuck is a Ukrainian chess player. He was awarded the title of Grand Master by FIDE in 1988 and a leading player also since 1988. He's been ranked at number 2 on the FIDE ratings 3 times, July in 1991, July 1992, and also October 2007. Mr. Lanier Dominguez Perez, born September 23rd, 1983, is a Cuban-American chess player who received the FIDE title of Grandmaster in 2001. A 5-time Cuban champion, Dominguez was the world champion in Blitz Chess in 2008. He competed in the FIDE World Chess Championship in 2002 and 2004, and the FIDE World Cup in 2007, 9, 11, 13, as well as 15. So he's pretty tried and tested here. This is all available on researchable information that you can find anywhere you want to search on the web. I happen to find it in Wikipedia. So this game is with Ivanchuck, who has the white pieces, and it starts with e4 and response is c5. We see we're getting into beginning of a Sicilian defense, knight to f3, d6, and we have the rare move bishop to b5, which is known as the Canal attack. And black plays bishop to d7 and bishop takes d7. I have played this before somewhat, so it's a learning experience to me to see after queen takes d7, c4, which is the main line. And with c4, white gains some space in the center, planning to eventually play d4 and play a positional chess game with a decent central space advantage. The move queen to g4, which most people consider asking questions about, at least, is not a good move. Here's what I discovered which could occur, and there is queen to g4. This is the move that I'm talking about. We'll have the logical move for white is to just castle. He can't save g2 and e4, so, well, black takes, there's d4, c takes d4, knight captures. The knight comes to c6 and b5. Already we see that well, we see that the knight on b5 is threatening to go to c7 and fork the rook and the king. And the only piece that black has out is his queen. He's behind in development. White has a lead in development. This is never good in the opening, especially with black being already a move behind. So the logical continuation from black in this potential variation, this did not occur in the game, is queenside castling, bishop to e3, a6, knight to a7 check. Excuse me. And then after the capture, we have bishop takes a7. Well, again, the only piece that black has out is the queen. And this is never a good way to start a game. And we see the potential for this knight here on b1 to travel up the board to b6 and give a check to the king and just wreak all types of havoc on a black position, being behind in development. So guess what? Black did not play 5 queen to g4. I mean, come on, with the stats that I just gave you about this guy, you think he's going to play that move? No, of course not. He played knight to f6. Well, after knight to f6, Mr. Ivanchuck plays knight to c3. We have g6 and d4 as a response. As I mentioned before, d4 is a part of the overall plan to gain space in the center of the board and exercise the space advantage that white is developing continuously. So we have c takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop to g7, and excuse me, I ate some crackers and the salt is interfering with my throat. So bishop to e3 is played after f3 so that when the knight comes to g4, well, so that the knight can't come to g4 and actually harass this bishop. So knight to c6 is played, and now we have castling from white. The next move is a6, we have a4. a4 is the move that's played to stop b5, right? And look, the reason why these other arrows are here, right here, pointing to c5 is because this is the direction that black wants to play on the board, and white is stopping the b5 push. And the b5 push is a common theme in this type of structure. He cannot play it, which means black is pretty much restrained on the queen side. So this game continues with e6, knight d to e2, because of course after e6 he definitely wants to push d5. He can't play b5, so he wants to try to play in the center of the board. This retreating knight move allows allows the pawn on c4 and the pawn on e4 and the queen on d1 to add extra control over d5, keeping black restrained somewhat. And after this move we have rook f to e8. And after rook f to e8, we have bishop to g5 and h6. So, well, we see the pawn moves that were attempted on the queen side in the center of the board, and now black feels compelled to chase this bishop away. But also, when the bishop goes to h4, this g5 move weakens the kingside pawn structure and allows moves like f4 potentially and h4 to further break open the king side. So the bishop goes back to f2, and then we have d5 from black, attempting to open the actually opening the center of the board, not trying to be restrained. And we have c takes, e takes, and then the knight goes to g3. Look at these weak squares though here on h4 and the other one on f5. This is the results of the g pawn moving to g5. So there is d takes e4 and queen takes d7. In this position, Ivanchuck is really like saying to himself, I'm almost sure of it, that, you know, the kingside pawn structure is weak. I'll eventually be able to get over there. My king is much safer, because if you look at these pawns around the white king, he is more compact. Less weak squares in this section, and black has more weak squares in his, so he decides to remove this powerful queen off the board, and we see that happening now. After knight takes d7, we have knight c takes e4, knight to f6, and then knight to d6, forking the b7 pawn and the rook here on e8, which then comes to e7, and then knight g goes to f5. Further attacking this rook, which then goes over and steps to d7, rook a to d1, king to h7, and now we have g4, freezing the g5 pawn and preparing the h4 push sometime in the future. So after knight to e7, there's the capture, rook takes e7, knight to f5, gaining another tempo against the rook. Not so much concerned about the bishop. And then we have rook to e6, rook to d3, rook to c8, f to d1, and b5. A captures b5, a captures b5, rook to b3, rook to b8, and then of course, as I mentioned, the pawn on g5 was frozen, and now is the time where white strikes on the king side with h4, bishop to f8, king to g2, and b4. Rook b goes to d3, and we have the rook going back to e8. Rook 1 to d2, rook to a8, and now knight to d6, attacking the rook that is on e8 and the pawn on f7. So the rook comes to e7 to defend, and the bishop goes to c5, threatening an x-ray discovery. If this knight moves, well, that rook is gonna have to move or be captured. And at this moment, black plays g takes h4. We have bishop captures on b4 to get a, recapturing the pawn that was captured on h4. So rook comes over to d7, bishop to c3, and rook to a6. Knight f5, offering to exchange rooks, but also bringing pressure against the dark squares on the king side with this knight. As I mentioned before, these pawn moves definitely weaken the black king. Trying to alleviate some pressure, Black exchanges rooks on d3, white recaptures, and then there's rook to b6, and then d8. So pay attention to these green lines here, these arrows. This rook on the back rank, on the 8th rank, and this bishop effectively act as a unit to attack the black king. And you'll see as the game proceeds, which won't be much longer, how effective this setup is. Of course, well, black wants to get rid of this bishop that sits here on c3, but I mean, this is an attacking piece. So he's not going to capture the bishop or the knight. He threatens the rook. Rook goes to e6, king to h3, and then we have h5. No problem, he just captures. Again, look at this again. I wanted to bring your attention to this bishop and rook working together on the long diagonal and back rank. This is a pattern that you'll often see. This pattern you will often see in games, so it is something to take note of. And knight goes to h5, rook to h8 check, effectively utilizing the bishop on d4 to give protection to the rook and check the king and make it walk forward towards further attacking resources from the white position. And we see that the king goes to g6 and he gets checked again. Knight goes to h4, he goes to g5 with his king, and well, rook to g8. This is a decisive attack, and black will not last long receiving these type of exposure with this type of exposed king, I should say. All right, so the king goes back again to h6, and we have knight to f5. Checking again, he goes back to h7, h8, g6, king to g4, knight goes to f6 check. So looking for some sort of way to save his knight, he puts it on f6, but this does not help at all because this is not going to help at all, because bishop takes f6, and then the king captures. But if the rook would have captured, he would have just got mated here, because there's nowhere to go, there's no way out, and this square is blocked by the rook, so that would be mate. But he didn't play that. He played put his king on captured with f6, captured the bishop on f6 with the king. And well, can you see the next move? The next move is, it's not difficult to find if you think about it. If the rook goes to h6, it'll be mate, but the king can always step out to e5, but not if you play this move, f4. And you see, after f4, the black king is doomed. There is no way out. There is nowhere to escape. He has no checks. He has no anything. And he can't even move the rook, because moving the rook from e6, just when the other rook comes to h6, it just x-rays that square, and well, there's still no flight for the king. So in this position, Mr. Dominguez, Lanier Dominguez Perez, rated 2725, and at the time Vassily Ivanchuck played this game, he was rated 2764. Mr. Dominguez decided to resign. And with this game presented to you, I hope that you find something interesting in it, and you are able to use some of these tactical devices that you've seen to improve your game. And with that, I'm going to say peace. I'm out. May your chess be the best. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share.